This week, we're going to practice retelling a story. Our objective for the week is I can describe the characters and setting of a traditional tale. I can describe the plot, problem, and solution, and retell a story's beginning, middle, and end. Good readers are always able to retell the story after they read. So we've learned that you should always do something at the end of a book. So we're just going to practice to become really great retellers. So if we want to get really good at retelling a story, what should we talk about when we retell the story? If you look at this chart, this is the story retelling rope. And it begins with the setting, and then you talk about the characters, the problem, the beginning, the middle, the end, and then the solution of the story. The setting of a story is where the story takes place. Where is everything happening? Is it in a park? Or maybe most of the story is at school? Maybe it's at the character's house? Maybe they're on a barn? Or maybe it's at a store? Wherever the story takes place, that's the setting. You know what characters are. Characters are the people or animals who the story is about. Now, the tricky part when you're retelling a story, you don't want to retell every single character that appears in the story. You only want to talk about the main characters. So like Cinderella or Pete the Cat, Moana and Maui, or Clifford and Emily Elizabeth. Those are the main characters. We're not going to tell you every character in those stories, just the main ones. The problem of a story is what kind of trouble did the characters get into? Normally, a story is going to have some type of problem that the characters have to figure out how to solve. So if you remember a few weeks ago, we read this story about Sleeping Beauty. So in that story, the problem was that she cut her hand on the spindle of a spinning wheel, and she was cursed and fell into a deep sleep for 100 years. Do you see how I didn't tell you every detail of the story? When I asked about the problem, I just told you a very short explanation of what the problem was. The beginning of the story is what happens at the very, very, very front, okay? So if we're thinking about Sleeping Beauty, in the beginning, all of the fairies came to give the princess a gift. I had to think about the whole story. Then I had to think about the beginning. How did the story start? And I had to think of the most important part. I told you the beginning of the story in just one sentence. When I ask for you to retell the middle of the story, I'm just asking you to think about everything that happened in the middle of the story and pick the most important part. So in the middle of the story, Sleeping Beauty, is when the princess cut her hand on the spindle and her curse began. At the end, sometimes the problem has already been solved, but there might still be a story that happens after that. You need to think of the very end of the story. What's the most important thing that's happened at the end of the story? So in the end, the prince and the princess got married in the story about Sleeping Beauty. We wouldn't be finishing our retell if we didn't talk about the solution. The solution is how the problem was solved. If you remember, the problem in Sleeping Beauty was that she got cursed. The solution to the problem, the way they fixed the problem in the book, was that a prince came and kissed the princess, which woke her up. So you need to remember, when you go to retell a story, you need to include all of these parts, and you need to go in this order. Start with the setting, then talk about your main characters. What was the problem that they faced? Tell us about the beginning, the middle, and the end, and then how was the problem solved? What was the solution to the story?